From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. See you again tomorrow night. Happy Tuesday. Lots to get to. Now, no disrespect to those that would like rolling coverage, but we're going to go war-free for the next 60 minutes, give you a relief from that. All of my colleagues have brought you fully up to date with everything you need to know. So let's talk about some of the things that have fallen through the cracks and the stuff that happened here at home, including in Queensland, where the bushfire situation continues to get worse. As you know, 2 people died last week. More than 50 homes have been lost. If you also have a look at towns along the New South Wales border, just north of Tenterfield, actually, those places have been cut off and people have been told to shelter as best they can. As you can see, the map, it was another one of those days there was a total fire ban in New South Wales that extends into Queensland. But as you can see, that northern part of New South Wales and the southeast of Queensland is where there is an awful lot of fire that is taking place right now. Here's what fire bosses have said in relation to anyone near these fires.
It's not a fire that we're going to be able to fight at all. Today is not about putting out the fire. Today is about saving the people and keeping them out of harm's way.
And that's the reality of these super hot days. And as we go deeper into summer, that's what the reality is going to be. They continue to get super hot summer days. And on those days, it is not about putting out the fire. It's about trying to save lives and save property. People that have been fighting these things and fighting them for days and days and days, well, they said this today.
Dark as anything, and I've got 2 small girls and dogs and everything, so I just packed the car and got out because it's just too close to home.
We've got our cars all ready and we've got things all in it all ready to go.
They've been working hard for days and days and days and they're just not giving up.
Meantime, another little detail that they don't want you to know about, because remember, no one lights fires. It's all to do with climate change. Now, of course, the intensity of those fires and the amount of lightning strikes means the majority of them are caused naturally. But several that have been around the Sunshine Coast, just north of Brisbane, in Queensland, guess what? Police believe that someone is responsible. In fact, they even arrested somebody who had multiple cigarette lighters with them. Now, police are investigating 4 Sunshine Coast fires over the past fortnight that they believe have been deliberately lit. There was one that was lit at 10:30 in the morning. There was another one that was lit at about 1 o'clock on Saturday. A fire which destroyed a building as well on October 23. That was because somebody broke in, and that's where they decided to start the fire, and also on October the 21st. The point is this: if you see anything suspicious that looks like someone starting a fire, please call Crime Stoppers. No matter where you are, that's the telephone number, 1800 333 000, 1800 333 000, or go online. Every state in the country gives you the ability to report and report anonymously. But here's the police in Queensland trying to find the people who are lighting fires.
I can't tell you the specifics of it. My understanding is there is investigations with respect to the Biwa fires of being suspicious, but I don't know the details with respect to why that may be.
And we know that our politicians love turning up when there is an emergency, and particularly love turning up to stand there and pretend that they're directing fire trucks to go here and there. And then obviously we know that they fly around in helicopters pointing at floods and pointing at fires and hugging people after they've lost so much. But the true test is the ability that we give to the volunteers who are the ones who will be fighting the fires or taking on the floods. Now remember, in Victoria, their fire services said that many of the bushfire trucks that are there to defend lives and property, well, some of them are 20 years old, but they'll all be used this summer. And in New South Wales, there was an interesting back and forth today between the head of the Rural Fire Service and a Nationals MP who claims to have messages from the front lines of fire volunteers not being able to buy petrol because the fuel cards had run out.
It basically says, and I'll read it, morning all, we have nearly maxed out our limit on our motorpass account. In caps, it says, this means we have to limit the use of the motorpass cards at this time. This affects, it names the brigade, vehicles only. It may take a few days to fix the issue. For trucks deploying to, and it sort of gives away the error, we'll need to arrange to get Ampol cards we have from council to one of you. This will allow all trucks deployed to fill up. Minister, how have you allowed your RFS trucks to not be able to even fill up on their cards, what would happen in an emergency?
Now, of course, the word council that you heard in there meant that there was cover to say, it's not our fire trucks, don't worry about it. But of course, when there's an emergency in New South Wales, and I'm sure it's the same in many other states, the head of the Rural Fire Service essentially becomes as powerful as the Premier, being able to send anything anywhere and almost able to spend as much money as they want renting aircraft or trucks. So to know that there are parts of the firefighting apparatus where the volunteers either don't fill up the truck or use their own money is ridiculous. Here's what the RFS chief had to say today in Sydney.
I've never seen this before, so I'm happy to look into it. I will speculate to you though that this is a council card, because councils have the trucks are vested in councils, so the councils normally will have those fuel accounts and issue the cards. So I'm happy to check it up, but that's why I wouldn't probably know about it, because it's a local government issue.
Your local council doesn't have a fire truck. Your local council has one that, of course, has all of the badges and all of the lights and all of the sirens and all of the powers as the ones that are run by the state service in your state. How does this happen? Well, of course, it's bureaucracy, which means this stuff is inevitable to happen. But as I said, in Victoria, the trucks are 20 years old. In some parts of New South Wales, there's no fuel because the cards run out. Oh, but the politicians will be there to say, we're there to help. Now, as you know, something that has well and truly changed, and we have charted it since the moment Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister, is that he went from somebody who had a special mind meld with the people of Australia, and he's now just a normal politician, one who has been caught out lying how many times, who has promised to make things better but in many ways has made them worse, has turned around and divided the country along racial grounds in the conversation in and around the Voice, a decision that of course cost at least $450 million during that referendum, when we all knew what the result would be for many months, regardless of whether you liked or disliked the outcome. We also know, of course, when it comes to petrol, that despite the fact that it keeps going up to about $2 a litre, or maybe even a little more, maybe a little less, the Goldilocks number is somewhere. But again, Anthony Albanese is in a position with $20 billion in surplus to spend 3 of that to reduce your petrol bills by 25 cents for the next 6 months. $6 billion of the $20 billion surplus that he currently has for 50 cents for 6 months, or 25 cents for 1 year. And of course, the cost of living, which has only ever got worse. And despite the fact that headline inflation, which has gone up for the past 2 months, is starting to head back in the wrong direction, things like food, insurance, rent, electricity are all multiples of the 5.4% when it comes to inflation. Yet, of course, the protection racket of the press gallery, who still think that it's the day after the last federal election and this is the greatest Prime Minister since sliced bread, well, they're starting to get a wake-up call. The reality is that Australians want a Prime Minister who is going to do something about cost of living, who will use the extra money that he has to cut petrol excise. A person with the political smarts to understand not to divide the country on an issue that cost $450 million, and he knew for months, because of the way that he kept that one going, not splitting the question, that ultimately it was all for naught. And of course there's the issue of him constantly being overseas. Now, the Airbus Albo tag is really starting to stick. Why? Because, of course, he made his way all the way to Washington last week, and rather than just tacking on a couple of days in London or finding some way to end up in the hemisphere that he would prefer to be in, rather than the one where he has to answer questions about domestic politics, he had to come back for a couple of days to pretend that he's in charge of everything here in Australia before he gets back on the same plane and buggers off to Beijing. Oh, but he says that he's going to be tough talking. Now, remember, of course, when there was an opportunity for the head of China and our Prime Minister to sit down for about 30 minutes in Bali? Now, remember, when there's a translator involved, you halve that time, giving you the best part of 15 minutes. If you assume that both leaders had equal time to talk, well, then the conversation went for about 8 minutes. So please don't play us for fools, Prime Minister, that in that 8 minutes, That you're going to be able to bring up everything that needs to be said face-to-face to China, when we know the reality is going to be, well, things are different. I'm not the old guy. Thanks very much for interfering in the last federal election. With the economic coercion, the messages about who can and can't use WeChat, and the very people who voted multiple times for the Liberal Party suddenly voted Labor, magically in line with what the CCP wanted the message to be. But of course, none of that will come up at all. They'll be talking about trade. But with a scenario where, again, $450 million on The Voice, petrol prices at near records and him not using a cent of the surplus to cut the prices, promises about doing something about cost of living, but all of it becoming more expensive, and of course spending too much time overseas, a near majority of Australians now believe that Australia is headed in the wrong direction and has been for some time. For multiple months, the Essential organisation has done polling, which always turns up in the Turnbull Times, aka The Guardian. The right track, or the number of people who say Australia's headed in the right direction, is down by almost 10% to 34%, up by more than 10%. Other people who think that it's in the wrong track, 11%. So again, while the media doesn't want to cover the scandals and the disgraceful decisions of this government, the people are living them, and the people are telling anyone who'll listen that they're willing to change their mind, and maybe even the government. Now, last week, political types scoffed at the mere suggestion that the Labor Party's majority could be at threat at the next election. Roy Morgan, of course, coming out with a two-party preferred, suggesting that the LNP was slightly in front of the Labor Party. A lot of people, including myself, saying, well, they might be in search of a headline, but there's some trend going on. So I must say, will the same people who slam-dunked the Roy Morgan poll be willing to do so to the Essential poll? Because today, two-party preferred, Labor 48, down 7 since February, Liberal National 46, up 6 since February, and 6% of people who are undecided. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that if you split that number in half, the Labor Party gets over 50%. And any smart betting money would suggest that the Labor Party probably will form government after the next election. But will it be a majority government or a minority government? If it's a minority government, well, of course, that's the Teals and Greens. And like Thelma and Louise, they're driving us off the cliff, baby. Woohoo! As for the primary vote, again, people are starting to move away from the Labor Party. And again, Albo's just another politician, which means he tells lies and needs to be held accountable for the decisions that he makes. 32% primary vote, that is, down on where they were at the last federal election. And 2 since January this year. The Libs are up apparently by 4%, leapfrogging the Labor Party to 34%, but obviously that's not enough for them to get anywhere near government. They need to be in the very high 30s or potentially even into the 40s to be, for want of a better term, almost guaranteed a victory. The numbers that most seemingly are moving around are those including the Greens, down by 4%, as perhaps Australians start to get a bit of an insight into the far left ideas that they want to put in front of us, and of course constantly calling Australia racist, which, funnily enough, doesn't work when it comes to your polls. But it may work when it comes to your profile, your academic career, and just how many people will invite you to literally lecture them on the sins of the past. $450 million was wasted on the referendum when it comes to The Voice. The Prime Minister arrogantly kept the exact same people who were in charge of it when it was 60-40 until they had driven it to 60-40 against. And to be honest, I thought I was finished talking about it in any great detail. But then we've heard from Stan Grant. As you may have read on other shows or seen in other places, Stan had plenty to say at a lecture that he gave at the Australian National University. But may I actually show you what he said, and I don't have to read it. There's our mate Chris Kenny appearing on the Q&A program. God love you, brother. Well, Australia was not big enough to vote for The Voice, says Stan. And here he is, in his own words, in his own tone, and you can see if it's any different than when you read it today. Here is what Stan Grant said about the word no, that 60% of the country, every state in the country, the Northern Territory, voted for.
I am hearing that word no, that word without love, that word of rejection, that word from which no other word can come, that word that speaks all languages and translates us into them.
But of course, nobody said no to the existence of Indigenous Australia. Nobody said no to wanting to do something. The word no was not necessarily, in my view, about constitutional recognition. I think most people would have backed it. It was no to an advisory body to Parliament. Because remember, unlike every other time when the government tries to change something, they didn't take anything off the table. Again, I recommend everyone to go and try and find, if you can still, before it gets labelled misinformation, as this Labor government wants to censor the sources of information that don't toe the party line. Again, I went into a great chapter and verse about why it happened and as big as it happened. But that was my lecture. This is Stan's.
There is no neutrality in being black and poor. White Australian journalists might have the privilege of neutrality, but that stops at the graveside for me.
Now, I know where Stan Grant came from, but the suggestion that he is still black and poor is, of course, ridiculous. He's been very well paid for a very long period of time by media organisations in this country, plus the private speaking circuit and now academia, and he has every right to earn as much as he wants. But the idea that neutrality was impossible because for him it was about being black and poor and all of that is connected to the families of the past. Well, I hate to point out that there are plenty of white and poor people in the country whose relatives have passed away as well. And while we can have a long and detailed conversation about if you were to be born in the worst street of the worst suburb, would you prefer to be white in that street or black in that street? The reality is that for millions of Australians, they grow up in very meagre circumstances. For hundreds of thousands, they grow up in poverty. Poverty in regional areas, poverty on the outskirts of town. They are the people who I constantly talk about on this program when it comes to things like cost of living. It's not just a battering ram against the Prime Minister. It matters to me deeply that 3.7 million Australian households couldn't afford or provide food for their families last year. Black, white, brindle, Hindu, Christian, Jedi. I don't care from what category you put yourself in. The reality is, as Australians, I want the best result for everyone. But again, I'm sorry, I'm lecturing. Back to you, Stan.
The Voice was never a modest ask. It was monumental. Perhaps this was the opportunity lost by the Yes campaign, to not let the Voice truly speak. Instead, it was shushed, shrunk small inough to fit into politics in the consultants' suites and the lawyers' dens. It was determined that if the Voice was made so inoffensive, people may say yes.
Because the way to make them say yes is to say that it is way bigger, way bolder, and potentially way more aggressive, way more towards the Lydia Thorpe worldview than the one that Linda Burney was trying to push. And finally, there was the elephant in the room, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, an Indigenous woman from the heart of our country, who we have been watching for years, just as we have been watching Stan Grant from television stations for years. And slowly but surely, people have started to connect with Jacinta's worldview. But just as Warren Mundine has been punished by KPMG, that's an interesting story to see, that he was due to speak there, but then his text messages ended up getting leaked, and so did his opportunity to speak before that consultancy firm. But again, I'm sorry, I'm lecturing. Back to Stan. Let's deliberately not mention Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, because remember, the punishment for Australia voting no is that Warren Mundine must be punished. Stan Grant's voice must be amplified. Lydia Thorpe becomes the one who becomes the spiritual leader of what was the Yes movement into a more aggressive movement, one that's all about black sovereignty. And Jacinta Price, who many people think should end up at the absolute front seats of Australian politics, well, they don't even mention her name anymore.
The victorious politician who says this no vote puts an end to the politics of grievance, and in a pithy, media-tested, inane sentence, the solemn truth of what a nation has done to my people. It's all waved away as a mere contrivance. a collective gripe.
Make no mistake, the great rage from the people who have continually put Stan into positions of power, because he is a man who is articulate and has plenty to say, but how they constantly find a new and a better role for him in multiple different organisations. They are the ones who will continue to amplify his voice, which includes a message that is as disparaging of the lady who Australia agreed with, that Jacinta Nampijinpa Price was the future of Indigenous affairs, about somebody who, yes, understood the importance, the connection of culture, understood the unique threats and difficulties that need to be dealt with, but has a view that disadvantage must be dealt with postcode by postcode as opposed to only through the prism of race. Every state in the country and the Northern Territory agreed with her view. But now the bitterness that is on show is we don't even mention her name. She's just the politician. Watch this space, because there's plenty more to come. Now, a decision that at the time when Anthony Albanese had his special mind meld with the Australian people was that Australia has made a decision when it comes to climate change action, despite the fact that every single poll for the past 10 years has said that while Australians know that climate change exists, I'm with them, Australians demand action on climate change, who wouldn't? There's only so much money that they're willing to spend, and for most people it's like $25 a year. But of course, the decision to up the number of renewables in the country to 80% meant that there are literally trillions, T4, trillions of dollars that need to be spent on a completely new electricity system. Not just solar and wind to absorb and to create the energy, new transmission lines to be able to move it around, and then batteries to be able to store it. But of course, the reality of all of this is that it has to be built. And it is literally 22,000 solar panels a day that need to be built. It is thousands of wind farms every year that have to be built, and they all have to go somewhere. But because most of the people who are driving this decision-making process, the ones that sit in the Q&A audience and clap away or technically fill out the form and say, I'm a Liberal voter, when, you know, they haven't for years. Or people like Zali Steggall who pretend that they're a disaffected Liberal when, by her own admission, she never voted for Tony Abbott to be our local MP, which means she didn't want Malcolm Turnbull to be our Prime Minister either? Okay. Well, of course, these people could be suggesting that wind farms are needed on things like Sydney's northern beaches, are needed, that perhaps the doggy park at Centennial Park in central Sydney just might have 1 or 2 solar panels on it. Of course not, no. That's for Mudgee. That's for the people in and around Ballarat. But unsurprisingly, the people who grew up or moved to those parts of Australia have no interest in just being, essentially, a giant extension cord for the benefit of people in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And people are starting to fight back against the idea of hundreds of thousands of wind farms and solar panels, and all of it is something that they say, look, I get it, we need it, but I don't want it here, because that's the exact same view of all the people in central Melbourne and central Brisbane and central Sydney. And again, an interesting little finding, which you'd have to send out a search party to find in The Guardian today. But thankfully they do, eventually behind 75 closed doors, have the raw data for you. What about this question? Australia needs to ensure that the development of renewables does not come at the expense of local communities. 70% agree. 70% of Australians get it. Because in the same way they wouldn't want their suburb changed, their city changed, why should people in other parts of the country have their area changed? And interestingly, while an organisation still exists in the Farmers Federation, the person who represents the Farmers Federation has changed since they were one of the clapping seals behind the Prime Minister signing this decision to take over regional Australia. And now there's a new Farmers Federation president who has now said, you know what, enough, okay? I get it, I get the balance, but this is too much.
I don't think there's a hotter topic at the moment than what's happening to farmland, especially in the renewable space. Noting that farmers, we're open to the discussion, But when it's being imposed on people, when people are being told that easements are coming through their property without any ability to negotiate or understand what's a good fit to the private land, the farmer land, we also want to protect blocks of land that we think are significant, and that's going to be location-based.
So the opposition leader who was right on The Voice, the opposition leader who was right on the Jobs Summit, looks like he's right again when it comes to these renewable projects in regional areas. And it looks like he's right when it comes to nuclear energy. Same poll, same organisation, but try and find the headline. Should Australia embrace nuclear power? 50% of people say yes, including 67% of Liberal and National voters, 43% of Labor voters, 39% of Greens voters and 44% of other party or independent voters. Oh, but the Prime Minister has this special mind meld. Yeah, with the people of Marrickville, the Teal seats and the public service bubble of Canberra. Now, again, I often talk about other people's money, about how this government particularly decides to piddle it up against a wall. Well, here's another example where you have to step up and do what government doesn't. But we won't sit back and let people suffer because government won't step up. Now, remember, of course, the Lismore floods of a couple of years ago. These were devastating in the northern rivers of New South Wales, and strength and love to those communities as they have been rebuilding. We always stay in touch with them and we'll catch up with them again very soon. But now drought is replacing flood. Unbelievably, the same areas, top right-hand side of this little map, are now heading towards drought, where they have almost had no rain since January of this year, which means the wonderful foundation, charity, helping hand that is Rural Aid wants to try to help people that are in those areas that have now gone from flood to drought. Farmers like this lady.
We lost half our beehives, so basically we had our ability to earn wiped out. We're only sort of back on top of the maintenance in the orchard now. So the Rural Aid volunteers are helping us clean up some of the bee boxes that we lost.
Scott, sorry, Scott, pretty sure you're not a lady. But what Rural Aid does is that Rural Aid obviously fixes fences that have been destroyed by floods. They take care of little jobs that might need to be done around the farm because getting the farm back online is particularly difficult. But one of the things that they do in times of drought is they drop off bales of hay. And yet again, we are back to this scenario where I ask you to go to the Rural Aid website and buy a bale. Google the words buy a bale, Rural Aid, you'll be able to get there. You can get one for as little as $50, go all the way up to $500. I know I ask you way too often about charity, and we'll do it every single month when it comes to Humpty Dumpty and little kids. But people who've literally gone from drought to flood back to drought, they need your help. And God love the good people of Rural Aid. Shout out to everyone who's watching us right now on Sky News Regional or in the cities, wherever you are and however you happen to do so. Great debate coming up. And Megan Kelly a little bit later on this Crackerjack Tuesday night. She joins us one full day early, which means Christmas has come early this year. Hey, good on you. A couple of people have sent us some emails and even have called the station and have asked, what is the website again with Rural Aid? It's buy a bale, all one word, buy a bale 2023.ruralaid.org.au, okay? I'll make sure that I put that up on our socials. Also, just by the way, hello to Joe Hildebrand sitting here. Hello, and fixing the world, you know, one arc at a time. See, I know what's happening behind him. None other than Matt Canavan, who's joining us as one of the big thinkers that are getting together in London. We'll talk about that plan in a second. But lads, just quickly, I don't know if you saw this, boss of Toyota has turned around and said that EV's not amazing for Australia because there's lots of distance between places. You know, incredible, right?
Really?
And then there was this one little video, which I'm sure you may well have got on your socials, but I had to show on my version of the giant social feed that is television. We double-checked with the NRMA. This is real.
That generator runs 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week. We're saving the planet to charge your electric car. Does it make a lot of sense to you? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Literally, the diesel generator. Now, okay, imagine if they had just had an ability to turn it off, press a button, turn it on for when you need it. No, we'll keep it running 24/7 in the desert so people can charge up their car. Anyway, that video, I'm sure you bounced around, but I want to show it on the telly. So, Stan Grant on The Voice. Matt, take your pick about all of the reasons why Australia got it right, because whether Stan secretly hoped he'd be one of the 24 or all the rest, who knows, right? But all that's behind us. But again, this idea, Australians decided to double down on the Jacinta Price version of things, rather than let's deal with everything by dealing with 1770, let's deal with it by postcode. That's what Australians clearly agreed with. That was the campaign that was before us. But then, Grant, in literally his lecture, don't you love this? Australians have said no to being lectured to, so a guy literally lectures you at the Australian National University, but who cares, right? He doesn't have to go for election anytime soon. He wanted a wilder pitch for the Voice, that it was even bigger than the moderate proposal being put before us.
Yeah, well, surprise, surprise, the details come out now, Paul, and obviously Stan Grant and many others are going through a period of mourning here. They're going through the 7 stages of grief. I'm sure we'll all be very relieved when they finally get to the stage of acceptance, accepting the will of the Australian people, because the Australian people voted to unify. They voted for the fact that we are one people, we are one country, and we don't want to divide ourselves. It was an extremely positive and unifying message where 60% of people thought that way. The loss for the No campaign was actually the 6th highest no vote in a constitutional referenda since our federation in 1901. That was 45 different referenda, and it's the 6th lowest vote. And I suppose what seems to be happening here, though, because they haven't quite got, the yes activists haven't quite got to the stage of acceptance, is they're struggling to accept the results of democracy, and they're all out there blaming us for being Trumpian and having Trump tactics when they're the ones that can't seem to accept an election result. So let's hope they ultimately get there, because I believe democracy works. I believe the will of the Australian people. We've decided this. It's time to move on and tackle the many, many other challenges that face our country.
Yeah, good point. There are plenty of others to get to. So, Joe, I'm going to give you a get out of jail free. Helpful or unhelpful was Stan Grant in the past couple of days?
Look, he obviously spoke very passionately, but the fact of the matter is that this is not an issue that the vast majority of Australians are passionate about, and frankly, they had bigger fish to fry. They're facing unprecedented cost of living challenges. So the idea that you should browbeat them and say this is actually something incredibly important that you haven't thought about at all, but you've just got to go and vote for it, even though we haven't really given you the detail. I mean, that sounds to me like a political suicide note. I can't really imagine much of the Yes campaign being worse
and then let's
than it was.
Driving it through.
That sounds like a template for it.
Yeah, let's pretend that there's no white poor people. Let's not pretend, all of that stuff that's all ingrained.
Yeah, like the truth is, he's right that Jacinta Price is an incredible campaigner, an incredibly effective communicator. And again, that was part of what...
So don't canna, learn from
But this is the thing, where was our Jacinta Price? We had Jacinta Price saying, it's okay, Australia, you're not racist. And you've got Marshall Langton saying, Australia, you dirty bunch of racists.
Correct.
Who do you reckon they're going to vote for?
All right, let's move on. Someone at Qantas needs to grab anyone who speaks to the press and tell them whatever they were planning to say, shush, right? Shush. Why? Because... Qantas people are now starting to say that despite the fact that they made $2 billion in profit, they need to cut the salary of workers to be able to keep the business afloat. Now, Joe, you and I are not known for a great business brain. There'll be people watching us right now who can, 4D chess while you and I are playing Connect 4. But I'm pretty sure when this airline's reputation is where it is, to hear anyone associated with its leadership say we have to cut wages of the workers when they made $2 billion profit.
Are you familiar with the screamer pillar from The Simpsons, which is a particular breed of caterpillar that wants to die? It wants to make itself extinct. And it turns out that flying kangaroos want to do the same thing. This is absolutely insane. The irony here is that it was Qantas's business model that actually was the template that put the frighteners through the union movement that said, oh my God, this is why we need same job, same pay laws, which now other businesses are worried that they might inadvertently get caught up in when they shouldn't be. It was Qantas actually saying, oh no, even though you wear the Qantas badge or you work for Qantas or handle the food for Qantas or the baggage for Qantas or do all these different things for Qantas,
but you technically work for
someone. You don't actually work for Qantas, you work for someone else. So we're going to get all that brand recognition out there, but we're not going to pay for the prestige or or the premium that premium brand is meant to represent. And again, it is I just cannot believe how much this airline fails to understand its own business. People do not fly Qantas because it's Jetstar. They fly it because they can afford to, because they want it to be reliable, they want it to be safe, and they want to feel proud, and they want to be able to watch those ads that look uncannily similar to Vote Yes ads, where the Australian Boys Choir sings, I've been to cities that never close down, but Australia is the greatest country on earth. You think, and I fly with the national carrier, not Jetstar. And the problem is, I think that over time, and he must have held out for a long time, but Alan Joyce, who of course came over from Jetstar, ended up running Qantas just the same.
Well, apart from the front end of the plane was very un-Jetstar-y. The chairman's very un-Jetstar-y, right? Right. That part, but for the rest of it up the back. But again, Matt, you sit on the committees in the Senate that have been looking into this stuff. What are they trying to say here? And again, even if they have a point, they have to know that they are arguing with both hands tied behind their back. They've got $2 million profit. Now is not the time to say, you know how we can make 3? Pay everyone less.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I mean, look, and I've got sympathy for workers here. Workers deserve a pay rise in Australia because inflation's out of control. So we actually have to have wages increase so people don't go behind and can't stay in their own homes. And Anthony Albanese, remember when he became Prime Minister, he said Australians deserve a wage rise. Sorry. Well, where is he now? Where is he when his mates over at Qantas here are doing the exact opposite? He seems to have gone completely timid about big corporates. He's sidling up with them against the workers. And what I'd like to see from Qantas, though, is why don't they just focus on their job of delivering a good service to their customer? Did you see the other day that they claimed to the ACCC that they don't actually sell a plane trip to you at a particular time?
A bundle of rights.
The vibe of flying. You potentially leave at a certain time to maybe a mystery destination. You don't know, your bag suddenly go potentially somewhere else. Why don't they just focus on delivering a good service? And that's a big message from this conference here at where I'm in London. We're sort of the anti-Davos here. And we're trying to say to businesses, corporate sector, governments, get back to doing your job to look after citizens, look after customers, and off these woke agendas that most people don't care about.
So, okay, just about this conference that's taking place right now, and Joe, you might have a follow-up question in a second, right? Give us an idea here. Where is it a how-to? Is it a collection of people learning talking points? Because obviously you find to the other side of the world and you don't just want to hear everyone saying exactly the same thing.
Sure.
What are you going to bring? What are the types of things you think you'll be able to bring back to the Australian political arena after spending such a time with so many big brains?
Well, look, as I said, it's been dubbed, some people describe it as the anti-Davos. I think the Davos Forum has gone off the rails in recent years, and I can report, Paul, that so far at least there's been no bugs on the menu. That's one positive and takeaway. Although I don't think they eat bugs in Davos either, but they want the rest of us to. And as I say, it's getting back to those basics, getting back to the basics of what people want. The one big takeaway I'm taking from here is that there is a big pushback building here in the UK at least, and some Europeans I've spoken to, against radical climate action. You might have seen the Prime Minister here, Rishi Sunak, moved away from some of their net zero agenda a few weeks ago. And they are on the front lines here of the energy crisis that's emerged since Ukraine. They're losing a lot of their local industry. And I suppose I would just hope that in Australia, we look at what's happening here and learn those lessons before we make the same mistakes. Because certainly Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese want to take our country down this mad net zero path. But we have this opportunity to avoid ruin, which has already to some extent happened here by looking at lessons from here. So that's been a great takeaway. There's a lot of good people here, a lot of good speakers, and we do need to unite among a positive message about serving people. Politics should be a service. It shouldn't be our ability to oppose agendas on the rest of our citizenry.
I don't know what special ability politicians have, and Matt, I love you very much. Matt knew exactly how long I had to go until I had to go to a break and had to go to Megan Kelly. And he went, look, Joe, you're not having your time. He just, the mind melded. He went, you know what, Joe, you've had your go. Shut up, do another show later, because I'm running it down. By the way, lots of the speeches from this conference are up on YouTube again. We'll have a look on our socials, or you can find the aggregation of it at skynews.com.au. Thank you, lads. Do it.
And one more thing.
No, Megan Kelly, next here on Paul Murray Live. Our favourite time of the week, no matter how depressing the world can be, the wonderful Megan Kelly joins us from the United States. The Megan Kelly Show, lots of places you can find it. YouTube, podcast and Sirius XM. How are you, Rockstar?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Paul?
Yeah, very good. Like you, trudging through the difficulties of the day, including how people who live in free countries are afraid to go outside because they think people are going to hunt them down because of who they are. And that's not paranoia. We saw what happened on that plane in Russia, and now in the United States. I can't believe that Jews are being told to stay inside.
No, it's happened now in a few different instances. At Cooper Union College here in New York City, the Jewish kids had to lock the library doors because the mob outside was banging on the doors, understanding there were Jews inside. They were in there afraid. Then at Cornell, just over the weekend, they were told that people were out to kill them and to avoid the Jewish center where they go to eat. And in Brooklyn, New York, there was a huge gathering of some thousands of people pro-Palestine, and the NYPD advised Jews who were thinking about going and walking anywhere near this area to stay away, that they couldn't be protected. And my reaction to all of this is the same, which is, no, not in America. That's not how things work here. If I were the president of Cornell University or Cooper Union and I heard anything about a threat to our Jewish students, my message would not be, don't go to the dining hall. Stay in your room because people are out to get you. I would say, how much do we have in our endowments? We're getting it all. I'm spending whatever it takes to get security in here right now, private security, or I'm calling every professor on staff and saying, get your asses over to the Jewish Center and make sure that our students are protected, because the answer is not Jews stay home. The answer is aggressors who are threatening them. We will stand up to you and ultimately we will expel you. But in all three tests so far, we've failed. We've sent a message that we cannot protect the Jewish targets and that they must barricade themselves from the rest of society to be safe. It doesn't make sense, and it's actually really dangerous. It really is anti-Semitism. What would be the other reason? It's kind of like, you asked for it. It's complicated. You're just going to have to deal with the effects of what's happening between Israel and Hamas. No, wrong answer. Try again. But these universities are so weak and they're so beholden to these wokesters on the left who are now trying to turn this into a purely political issue without paying any mind to the disgusting terrorist attack, that they're afraid. They don't want to stand up to them. And I will say, I think more Jewish individuals and Gentiles and Muslims who are against what's being done to our Jewish friends, and Buddhists and Hindus, we can go down the list, need to get out there and say something too. I mean, I'm happy to go out there and put back up the Israeli flag, put back up those posters, shame the people who are pulling them down. I really am. And then the first thing I'll do if somebody tries to challenge me is turn on my iPhone so I can make a star out of whoever tries to mess with us. But our Jewish friends need our help right now. All these so-called allies who helped during BLM, and they helped on the trans stuff, and they helped when gays needed equal rights. Too many of them are nowhere to be seen. And the Jews are finding themselves alone, which makes it even scarier to go out in large numbers and protest, because, well, look what happened in Russia, as you just pointed out. They came in on a flight from Tel Aviv. It was obvious who was going to be on that flight. They had to be hidden. They had to be helicoptered off site for their own safety. We don't want anybody to find themselves in that situation.
Now, Friends, of course, has had multiple lives, be it on streaming and, of course, way back when on free television. It was one of the last shared TV experiences before the culture split in 1,000 different ways. And, of course, Matthew Perry, one of its stars, has died in the past few days. We'll learn more about exactly what took his life, be it his own behaviour, accident, or who knows, right? But what have you thought of the reaction to it?
Well, I was very sad because I think that show was peaking just as I was coming of age. You know, I was about 23 years old, I think, 22, around there when it launched. And I watched
You're still peaking, mate. Come on. You peak every week.
Maybe in some other ways, like around the belly region, maybe peaking out. In any event,
sorry.
So I loved it, and I loved the character of Chandler Bing that Matthew Perry played, like so many others did. I mean, his comedic timing, the way he used his inflection on his certain words. You know, could I be any more? Could she be any more out of my league? Things like that. Things that we say to this day that we don't necessarily know we got from him. incredibly clever, good looking. And to me, it's a very sad story about, again, something we talked about last week when we talked about Britney, fame, and in his case, addiction. He was very open in an interview he gave to the New York Times a year ago when his book launched about how he got down on his hands and knees 3 weeks before he was cast in Friends and begged the Lord, begged for him to make him famous, super famous. It's what he wanted more than anything. And we see how fulfilling that was for him. Not at all. Fame fills absolutely no voids. It solves absolutely no problems. It only creates them. Matthew Perry, I think, was lost at the time he went to Hollywood. He remained lost. And even though he was surrounded by so many friends, he never managed to find himself until he wound up in recovery. And he wound up saying, Paul, that he hoped his legacy would not be that show, even though it made him famous and it made him very rich and it brought a lot of people a lot of joy. He hoped his legacy would be the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people he helped by coming clean on his addiction. And what a scourge, what a monster it was for him. Just don't start. And as soon as you start to feel it spinning out of control, get help early.
Let's talk a bit of politics now. The Iowa poll that's come out from the Des Moines Register, they're pretty much bang on here. And they say that Trump is likely to win in Iowa, but it's not the 50-point margin and he's not over 50%, meaning theoretically there's someone who could end up being the not Trump, but there's still 100 people trying to be not Trump.
It's very interesting. So Trump is at 43% in this Iowa poll. This is the gold standard poll. And his next closest competitors are Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who are both tied at 16, which is more ahead than he was in the last poll. His number 46, or whatever he is, 43, is higher than he was in the last poll, which was 42. So he's going up despite all the crap that's been thrown at him. DeSantis went down. Nikki Haley went up 10 points. So she's on a bit of a roll. And it'll be interesting to see, like in a month and a half, 2 months, by the time we get to Iowa and New Hampshire in January, if her train keeps going the way it's going, she's going to be up here. And DeSantis is going to be done. He'll be off. Nobody else in the poll put any number on the board that was worth even mentioning. But if you look at all of the not Trump vote, it equals 51, which last time I checked is higher than 43. So the not Trump vote in Iowa is higher than the Trump vote. So it's back to the problem that the not Trump voters have faced all along, which is you need consolidation or you're screwed. You need to convince everyone to drop out other than one strong candidate, or it's going to be Trump. And no one has been willing to do that. Donald Trump, he's crushing by all measures. And here's what I want to say about it. It's self-fulfilling, the snowballing of Trump's success. He's becoming truly like the snowball that grows and grows and grows. The more it rolls and goes downhill or uphill or sideways, whichever way it goes, it gets bigger. And the more stuff they throw at Trump, the harder it is for him to get the nomination. This massive civil case trying to ruin his business, 4 criminal indictments, which actually might put him in jail before the election in 2024. Go down the list of the controversies. The bigger he gets, the more he doesn't roll over, fall down, and stay down, the more inevitable he seems, the stronger he seems, the more formidable.
Yeah, I agree completely. Megan, if only we could vote for you. Lovely to talk to you. We'll talk to you again next week.
See you next week, Paul. Bye.
She's the best. Nigel Farage will join us on Thursday night. Lots of flipping around, but you get them all this week, so be here each and every night. I tell you what do they say? You live and learn. Like every day, if you don't learn something, then, today wasn't a great day. Well, I tell you what, I did learn something today. James McPherson is very talented. Now, he's got a particular glint in one of his eyes tonight, and I want you just to lean into the television and tell me which one it is. Because if it's the same one that I think it is, I think I might know why. And I'll tell you tomorrow night why I think he may have that little glint in his eye. Let's all watch together.